Hello. This is the promised bonus questions with Kat that I didn't have time for in episode 8. And if you're listening to this and your name is not Kat or Mark, then I'm going to assume that you really like what I'm doing. So, if you wouldn't mind giving the show a rating and maybe a comment on your favorite pod provider, I would appreciate the feedback. Thanks again for listening. I hope you enjoy these bonus questions in Kat's field of expertise. We've had a chance to talk about your athletics a bit, but we want to know you a little bit more. You're a professor of law at Boston U, and you have a number of degrees. You've been in school forever, it looks like. You have a JD in law and a PhD in economics. And you said to me in the email exchange that my racing life is much more exciting. But I personally enjoy the various ways in which the subsets of economics converge with all other areas of life. And you seem to have a very niche market there with the medical law and economics. So I want to just ask you some questions about that since I got you here.
Sure.
I'm an outsider but what I understand of medicine in the U.S. is that in addition to helping people, it also seems to be a business, a very big business with profit as the goal. So as an economist, and I don't know if this has been studied, but is there a price point in malpractice insurance that leads to a higher quality of care or conversely a lower quality based on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So this is one of the areas that I have been studying for a long time. I study the connection between the medical malpractice liability system and how it impacts medical malpractice insurance markets. And so, it's very interesting and really counterintuitive. So the insurance prices should actually just reflect the expected losses that insurance companies, anticipate paying out for doctors who commit malpractice. And so as doctors get better, right, they injure fewer patients, we should see prices going down. And as they injure more patients, we should see prices going up. So those prices kind of reflect how much injury doctors are inflicting on their patients. So there are a lot of other things happening besides, how much doctors are injuring people. One thing is that doctors lobby. They lobby state legislatures where these laws happen, and they've gotten state legislatures to put caps on the amounts that injured patients can recover. And so when you artificially cap liability, how much a patient can recover in one of these suits, you would expect that the prices, medical malpractice insurance prices would come down. But in fact, what we see in the empirical literature is that either they don't move at all, or in some cases they go up, right? So these are the kind of phenomenon that I study. And my approach to thinking about these markets is that, you can't just think about the impact of these damages caps on injured patients. Like maybe they're going to be less willing to sue. So we should see liability rates coming down, but actually doctors react to those caps as well. And so if they don't have enough pressure coming from the liability system, they might not engage in costly efforts to improve the quality of care they're giving, and they actually injure more patients. So we see more injured patients getting less in every case, but more patients. And so those two things balance out, and we see prices staying the same or even going higher. So this is the kind of stuff that I do when I'm not training is really use data and economic theory to think through these issues, to try to get a better sense and help regulators think about how to better regulate markets to get what we want from them, whatever that may be.
Mm-hmm. Another question along the lines of maybe where you're working is, we heard last year back in Italy at the start of the COVID crisis, and now in India they're having issues around oxygen and things like that. In the hospital systems, when they get overwhelmed and there have to be decisions made about who gets that ventilator and who's getting the oxygen and things like that. How does an economist in medical law look at making those decisions and help in drafting the ways in which those decisions are made? And then what are the legal ramifications of making those decisions?
Yeah, this is a great question. You're throwing the softballs at me. No, this is one of the hardest questions. This is one of the hardest questions, right? When you run your healthcare system as a market, in the market, typically the highest paying consumers are going to get the resources. In healthcare, right, we don't feel good about that. Even here in the US, we do not feel good about that. We want more equity in healthcare resources distributed to the folks who are in the most need. And so, so it's a little bit tricky. You have to think first about what you're trying to achieve. So generally in markets, we want to get the goods into the hands of the highest valued, the person that's going to get the most value out of them. But we measure that by willingness to pay, which means you've got to have resources that you can hand over, right? But we know in healthcare markets, the most needy are sometimes the ones that can't express their preferences because they don't have, resources to pay for what they need. And so in a perfect world, we would make sure that everybody has sufficient resources to get what they need, right? As an economist, we think government's not good at doing this. Government is not good at saying your preferences are you have a higher value for this good than this other person. It's just very hard for the government to look into the heads of consumers and say, you value this more, we're going to make sure you get this resource. You value this more, you're going to get, less of this resource, but something else. So we want consumers to do it themselves. We think they have the best information. But if you don't have the resources to express your preferences, we're not going to get what we want, which is, again, the goods into the hands of the highest valued people. The people who value those resources the most. So we do that, and we use the government to subsidize, right, to make sure people have resources, right? So that's a lot about the Affordable Care Act is around making sure people have resources to pay. So that's number one. We want to make sure that everybody coming into the hospital can get the resources they need, regardless of their ability to pay. That's number one. So that's kind of first before you get into hospital doors. Now we are overwhelmed, right? You've got all these people with the wherewithal to pay, and you've only got so many ventilators, for example. What do you do as a doctor? How do you make those decisions? This is now going beyond economics, right? This is a medical decision. Ideally, we would want doctors to be making choices about, who is going to benefit the most from the ventilator, right? So it's really an opportunity cost. If I use the ventilator over here, I'm giving up an opportunity to use the ventilator for this person. Okay, now between these two, who's going to get the most benefit? Right. But then, how do you measure that? What are doctors going to look to? Age, if I've got an 80-year-old person and a 20-year-old person, should age come into it? That's beyond economics. That's beyond medical care. Now we're getting into ethics. Mm-hmm. So it's a multi-layered problem that I think is incredibly difficult. And in the US, we're not even clear on who should be making that decision. Should it be doctors making that decision? Should it be the government regulating the doctors to make a particular decision that's from the will of the people? It's very difficult. But I think right now we've made the choice to leave it to the doctors, and we do that. We did that during COVID in a really powerful way by the legislatures deciding, you know what, we're not going to hold doctors liable for any injuries caused in the treatment of COVID. We're not going to hold hospitals liable for any choices they make with respect to treating COVID patients. So we lift liability completely. I don't know. I'm not sure how I feel about that. There's a debate happening here around whether that was the right way to go. I feel like we get some good from liability pressure. But some people say, you know what, in this circumstance, when it's just so beyond where we've been in the past, we need the doctors not to be thinking about liability. We need the doctors to be thinking about what the patients need. And, we'll see. There'll be a lot of study about jurisdictions that didn't release doctors from liability and jurisdictions that did, and we'll be able to look. I mean, we don't have random assignment, so it's hard to make causal connections without random assignment, but we'll be able to tease out a little bit around what's the effect of lifting liability during a situation, an emergency situation like COVID.
Yeah. See, I knew you would have the answer. You have the answer.
I could talk about this for longer than you want to talk about it. But.
My next question, if you thought that one was hard, I think is going to be even harder. And maybe we'll have to go another extra hour with this. But I believe you do a little bit of work around the ethics as well. And or things of that nature. So we know that a person's end of life is their highest medical cost and the biggest cost to the medical system in general. Like just as people age, those last few years are what costs the most. So I got a two-parter here for you. A, is Western society properly prepared for the baby boomers' healthcare needs that are coming? And B, taking this one step further, is there an economic argument for or against euthanasia for seniors who don't want to live in pain and don't want to have an end of life that is uncomfortable? You got 1 hour, go.
Another softball. So this is something that we are talking about a lot in the U.S. There has been a major push for loosening the restrictions around choice, end-of-life decision-making. And we have, in many states here now, the states are pulling back on restrictions for physician-assisted end-of-life decision-making. And, as an economist, and especially as, that's coming from a libertarian bent, where, we like the idea of people being able to make choices. And if we think about a choice that should be unrestricted, I mean, I think end of life is about the biggest choice, that people should be able to make. The problem that we face with it is that in some cases we worry about capacity to make that decision. We want to make sure that if someone is making that very final decision, very final irreversible decision, that they're making it with a full capacity to be able to make that decision for themselves. So that's one, and that can be very tricky. It can be very hard in some cases to determine whether there's sufficient capacity to make that choice. The other problem that we worry about, I mean, there are many facets of this problem. One other one that's really tough is that there might be conflicts of interest. So, for example, family members who are taking care of the person might have undue influence over the person's choice in ways that we worry about. We're really trying to craft regulation to make sure that the choice that's being made is the person's choice, that person's choice, not anybody else's choice, and that the person has the capacity to make that choice. So I am very much in favor of loosening the restrictions in a smart way to make sure that these very important aspects of the choice are verifiable, that we can make sure that there are safeguards around the choice. but I'm very much in favor of lifting the restrictions against doctor-assisted suicide, essentially. I mean, in terms of costs, it's very interesting. The Affordable Care Act put into place regulation to expand access. Very, very little was done in terms of cost containment, almost nothing. And so what we have seen over the last, I would say, 5-6 years is a massive expansion of costs. Of course, there are many more people who are in the system, and that's what we want. We want more people in the system, but costs are increasing. And one of the big problems we have in the US is with the lack of competition on the provider side, both in terms of hospital consolidation, where they're monopolizing particular markets and they're able to raise their prices to a level that is outside the competitive price. Doctor groups are banding together and acting as groups to push prices higher. And insurance companies as well. We have markets where there's maybe one insurance company, health insurance company selling insurance. And when you have one insurer, you're going to have high prices. There's no competition. And so I think that the next big push from a regulatory perspective in this country must be ensuring competitive markets. And I think that's going to, if we can manage to do that well, we have not, I think most people are in agreement that we have not regulated competition well, so that we have these big monopolies. We have a lot of power on the provider side to keep prices high. And, insurance companies are willing to pay those high prices as long as people will pay for premiums, because they make money now on volume, right? They have to pay us back if they don't spend, more than 85% on your healthcare costs. They have to refund our money. So they can't profit off of, taking our money and keeping our money and not letting us go have care. Those days are over. Now they make money by doing volume. And so they want us to keep getting treat. So that's another incentive, right? That we need to really get our brains around. And that's the over-treatment, the providing of unnecessary care, and market competition problems, monopoly power on the provider side, those two issues, if we don't get a handle on those, we're going to see costs go through the roof, continue to accelerate. And you're exactly right with the baby boomers. I mean, we're going to have this massive group of people. And we know from the statistics, the oldest 5% or the neediest 5% chew up 50% of the costs of our care. I mean, the distribution is stark. And so as we have people getting up into that range, if we can't get a handle on prices, high prices because of market competition issues, and over treatment, provision of unnecessary care, we are going to get to an unsustainable level, given the fact that U.S. citizens don't want to pay higher taxes. We don't want to pay higher taxes. So, I mean, this is why we have just massive debt levels in the U.S., massive national debt in the U.S. And I think it's probably in crisis state. And we'll see what happens. I think there are definitely moves to chip away at it. And one thing that's hard at the federal level is that you might have noticed that we just keep flipping back and forth between liberal. Then we're not happy with the liberals, so we get the conservatives. And then we get unhappy with the conservatives, and we have the liberals. So at the federal level, we get this flipping back and forth, and there's a lot of instability in regulation, and that causes problems, unique problems that we have to solve. So it's a challenge. I will say, though, Larry, that I do still think, despite all of that stuff, that the U.S. has one of the best healthcare systems in the world in terms of what's available to us, the kinds of treatments we can get. it's just absolutely phenomenal. If you think about what happened during COVID and the fact that we were able to get pharmaceutical companies working toward this goal of vaccination and achieving this and the rollout. I mean, it's just, I look at it and I just marvel. It's absolutely phenomenal. We didn't do a good job with masking and distancing and all of that at the beginning, through the kind of the first year. We didn't have the best role models to look to and really get a handle on like how to take care of each other. But I think in terms of the vaccination discovery, the innovation and the rollout, it's really been phenomenal. Could we have done it faster, better? Probably. But I think being where we are right now is pretty amazing, given that generally it takes 10 years to get one of these vaccines into the market.
Yeah. I knew you would have fascinating answers to these questions, and I'm asking these entirely just because I want to ask them, and half of this might not make it to air, but I am having a great time. So I'm going to ask you one now about your work as a professor and working with the youth of today. So we are recording this interview a couple days after the verdict in the George Floyd case that found Derek Chauvin guilty on all counts. And I saw that you were a moderator for an event at your school. It was called A Day of Collective Engagement, Racism and Anti-Racism, Our Realities and Our Roles. And that was in June of last year, about a month after the George Floyd death. So everything was very heated at that time and fresh in the minds of everybody, not just in America, but everywhere. And I'm wondering, when you had this day of conversations at your school, and then you were able to moderate a summary of it at the end of the day, what did you learn in that day, and what were the students saying and feeling?
That it was a real honor for me to be part of that program. And for me, that program and joining in on that program is one piece of a journey that I've been on in this last year, especially last summer, in the waking up, right? The waking up of America. I mean, we are at a crossroads, and there are a lot of people that are saying, you know what, it's about time. It's about time, people, right? But it's been really incredible. So Boston University just hired recently a professor, an historian named Ibrahim Kendi, and he started an anti-racism center at Boston University. And there's a lot of energy at Boston University around these issues. The law school is in the second year of having a female Black dean, first female Black dean of Boston University School of Law. And so these issues for us have been absolutely at the fore. The students are heartbroken at what's going on. I think they feel it at a really visceral level. They look at what's happening and just thinking, wow, is this the kind of world that I'm, about to embark into? And I can say, they have very little tolerance for what's going on. They are ready for action. They are the white students are learning how to be advocates for students of color, minority students, to really be helpful to engage in these really difficult conversations. So I would say right now, we are in the middle of having a lot of very difficult conversations and listening to the stories. And what I love about this last year is that there is a more willingness to listen openly and more of a willingness on the part of people of color and minorities to tell us about their experiences. How are they moving through the world? What are they experiencing? And I can tell you, Larry, that week after week after week as I go to these sessions and I read more. And I really feel like I'm putting myself through a course on on how to be more inclusive, how we can make our institutions more diverse, more inclusive, less systemically racist. I didn't even know what that meant a year ago. And I'm getting closer to what it means now. I wouldn't say I fully understand it. And so the students are certainly the students of color are depressed. They are afraid. They are afraid of leaving their dorm rooms because there are campus police outside. That's not the world we want to live in. My dean's afraid of her children, her Black children leaving the house. Are they going to come back? Are they going to get stopped by a cop and shot because they've moved their hands in the wrong way? I mean, it's just, so there's a lot of fear. There's a lot of fear. And it just keeps happening and it keeps happening. So we had the trial and this outcome, which I think, thank God it went that way, because I think the whole country, it was not going to be good. What was going to happen to this country if that verdict didn't turn out that way? It was justice. But Larry, in the last month, there have been 5 or 6, or more Black people driving, getting shot for driving, getting shot for running from police. They're afraid to engage with because they're fear for their lives, running, being shot in the back, being shot, in these circumstances. And it just keeps happening over and over and over and over again. And, there is a ton of work to do. There's a ton of work to do. The students are demanding that we act. They're not going to tolerate anymore that we keep hiring white men to be on the faculty. They're just not going to tolerate the lack of diversity, the lack of inclusion, the lack of support, the lack of understanding. They're not going to tolerate it anymore. So it's great in that the students are teaching us. I feel like I'm learning so much from the students. And I actually run a little running group, and I run with the students every week. I try to run with a group of students, and the runs, just listening to the students, just asking the students questions about what's going on, what's in their minds, what are they talking about? This is on their minds. This is what they're talking about, and they share stories. And if you ask, they're going to share. If you ask, they're going to share. And we need more of that. We need to understand. And I'm changing the way I'm teaching. I added an entire session to my torts course about racial differences in damages that are awarded to whites versus Blacks, right? I mean, it's just a massive difference, if you look at, and we have to have these conversations. And I went into those class sessions just terrified, like, I'm going to say the wrong thing. I'm going to get fired. I'm going to say something crazy and I'm going to get fired, and I'm terrified that I'm going to insult the students, that I'm just not educated. I'm not enough about these issues. I'm not an expert. I don't know how to conduct these discussions, but we have to force ourselves. We just have to force ourselves to engage and try and talk about it. And through those experiences, we will learn how to get better at it. And I got so many great comments on my teaching evaluations about that class session, thank you for having that class session and letting us talk about it. So I'm learning, and it's an absolute amazing learning experience. I wish we didn't have to go through this. I wish we had a society that was, more diverse, more inclusive, more understanding, better able to handle these issues. But I feel optimistic that we are on a trajectory that we cannot turn back from now.
The fact that the youth are the ones leading it, I think, says a lot about the fact that there will be change.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, that's the end of the bonus material. Thanks again for listening, and for getting to the end, I'll let you know that in episode 9 on June the 4th, I will be speaking with longtime Big Island World Championships racer and supporters Peter and Katie Bourne, along with Vancouver resident and 2021 UMC racer Barry Berg. Thanks for listening.